Well, our next witness, as you already know, is anonymous. She will be known as Mrs. A.X. In her case, too, I make the same type of order as I made earlier, but let me read it out so that you all hear it. The name and address of witness W0507, that's Mrs. A.X. to you and me, the name of her late husband, and any other member of her family and any other identifying information, such as the witness's image or a description of their appearance, cannot be disclosed or published in any form unless express permission is given by me or by the solicitor to the inquiry acting on my behalf. Witness W0507 must be referred to only as Mrs. A.X. This order remains in force for the duration of the inquiry and at all times thereafter, unless otherwise ordered, and I may vary or revoke the order by making a further order during the course of the inquiry. As you know, there will be no live streaming, either visually or orally. With that protection, may we have Mrs. A.X., please?
Mrs. A.X., your full name is known to the inquiry. Could you please take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Mrs. A.X., you're here to tell us about your late husband, and you're going to refer to him by his name, because it's too hard not to say his name when we're talking about him. But just to make it clear that his name is covered by the restriction order and mustn't be used outside of this room. You met in 1972. Can you tell us a little bit about what your husband was like before he became unwell?
He was just a normal, hard-working man. He had his own business. We had nice holidays. We were just a normal couple.
He loved to ski.
He loved to ski. We had lots and lots of skiing holidays before he became ill. And summer holidays, and we just had a nice lifestyle.
In July 1985, his ankles started to become swollen and he was tired all the time.
Yeah.
What did the doctors find that was the problem?
Well, the GP was, she didn't know what the problem was, so she referred him to the local hospital and they did various blood tests and eventually said that he had glomerulonephritis.
Which is a kidney condition.
Kidney condition, yeah.
And he'd always had to clear his throat.
Yeah, he'd always had, not a sore throat, but always had this sort of, whenever he was talking. And he'd had that from being a child. He'd had his tonsils out, but it didn't make any difference. But he'd always had that, and they said eventually that that's where the infection could have come from. It's like a meningitis type infection.
I thought he'd had an untreated streptococcal throat infection, which had then affected the kidney function.
That's correct, yeah.
He started receiving steroid treatments, but after a while that was deemed to be unsuccessful, and he was started then on plasma exchange.
Right.
Can you tell us about that process?
What do you mean?
What did he have to go and do?
Oh, it's a form of dialysis, but he just used to go to the local renal unit once a fortnight, and they would draw off his plasma and give him new plasma from a donor. The old plasma then was drained off, and that seemed to work for a while, stopped the kidneys from failing. It was a gradual failure, and it seemed to slow things down a little bit.
And you have a particular recollection of what the new plasma looked like?
Yeah,
when
it looked
was on?
like peach Melba.
And the new plasma had Baxter written on the bags.
I think it was Baxter. You know, it's a long time ago. I remember it being in a clear. It was clear fluid in a bag that was fed through the dialysis machine.
The old stuff coming off looked like the
And
peach
old
Melba.
stuff coming off looked like peach Melba.
And the new was clear, but
Yeah.
you said in your statement that you recall that Baxter was written on those
I
bags
think
as it
was
went
Baxter, yeah.
in. Your husband had that treatment every fortnight for about 18 months.
Yeah.
But over time, as you say, his kidney function did gradually decrease.
Yeah, he carried on. He was still running the business. We were still having holidays. He kept filling up with fluid, obviously, but because his kidneys weren't working properly. So, yeah, for 18 months we just tried to carry on as best we could, but then they started to fail.
His kidney function went down to just below 20%.
Yeah.
And at that point, he became more unwell, I think.
Yeah. And the consultant at the time said he thought that he would need full-time haemodialysis.
In your husband's medical records, there's a laboratory report from April 1993 that we're just going to put up on the screen. It's a different witness number, Henry. It's 3807003, please. And we can see in the bottom right-hand corner there the date of report, 26th of April 1993, and it indicates that he was positive for hepatitis C. Were you or your husband aware in 1993 that he had tested positive for hepatitis C?
No.
Now, in your statement, you thought your husband had discovered he was hepatitis C positive in about 95, but having looked at some records, you think it was actually 1996.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about how you came to find out?
It was a routine renal appointment. We used to go every 3 months because we were dialysing at home then. So it was just a routine clinical appointment, and they did routine bloods, and we had the consultation, and then he said at the end, oh, we'll just need to take these bloods. So he got the blood forms out, and then he got a category 3 risk sticker out of his drawer and stuck that on, and I asked him why he was doing that, and he said, oh, I don't really know. And he sort of flicked through the notes and said, oh, it looks like you've got hepatitis C.
Because at that point, we won't explain your role, but at that point you actually worked in the hospital, so you understood what category 3 risk stickers were.
Exactly, yeah.
We asked the doctor, Dr. Throssell, to respond to your statement, and he said he can't now recall specific details of what you discussed at the appointment, but he provided us with some of the medical records, and we've correlated them with those that you had.
Yeah.
He noted the 1993 test results, and he indicated that the next note in the clinical records is the document 3807004. And we can see it's in different handwriting to the rest of the page. It's dated the 1st of March 1996. And it says, to discuss and counsel re-hepatitis C positivity on next attendance needs category 3 stickers on samples. So it doesn't appear that this was a consultation in March 96, but that there was a note of the need for those stickers that you recall.
Mm-hmm.
And you've provided us with the medical records, and Dr. Throssell has obviously looked at them as well, and there isn't anything else between the 1993 result and this note in 1996 that has any reference to hepatitis C. We then come to the next entry in the notes, which is the 10th of April 1996. and it is an entry made by Dr. Throssell. There is a general discussion about your husband's condition, and if we go over the page, there is a single line, counselled re hepatitis C. And that consultation was then followed with a letter to the general practitioner, which we'll have a look at. It's 3807005, please. We can see it's dated the 12th of April 1996. There is general discussion about your husband's renal failure and being on home hemodialysis. And then in the very last paragraph, thank you, it simply says, routine screening has shown him to be hepatitis C positive, and I explained the significance of this to him today. What do you recall of being told about hepatitis C at that appointment?
Not a lot. It made it more difficult because I did know a little bit about hepatitis C anyway through my job. And although Dr. Throssell was really nice, I don't think he knew as much about it as I did, and he sort of dismissed it as, saying, but there's nothing for you to worry about. And that's when I questioned him about whether or not he ought to see a gastroenterologist, to have his liver checked. And he more or less said, well, you can if you want, but I don't think it's going to be, it's not going to help you in any way. You're not going to die of it, I think were his words. Hepatitis C won't kill you, he said, it'll be something else. So we just waited then for the appointment to go and see the gastroenterologist.
In terms of that referral to the gastroenterologist, Dr. Throssell's responded and has said that he thinks it may have been in relation to an appointment you had a year later with a different doctor. And you're not entirely sure whether it was Dr. Throssell or whether it was, in fact, a year later with a different doctor.
I can't remember.
But what you do know is that at the appointment, when you raised the question of going to see a gastroenterologist, that was the response that a doctor gave you.
Yeah.
When your husband was referred to the gastroenterologist, he had an ultrasound of his liver, and he was told there was no scarring to it. What's your recollection of what happened in relation to having a liver biopsy and the discussions around having treatment for the hepatitis C at that point?
I don't think the way it was explained to us was a liver biopsy would determine it, if there was any damage to the liver, but it also came with complications, and I think we decided at the time he'd got enough going on, he'd got end-stage renal failure and everything else that goes with that, and it was just something else that, if it wasn't affecting him and it wasn't making him ill, then we didn't want to do it.
Because you were also advised alongside that the prospects of success of interferon treatment
were very low.
Very low.
Yeah.
Your husband obviously had the renal failure, and he also then had to have his parathyroid removed. And you've wondered whether the hepatitis C exacerbated his renal failure, but you're not very sure.
I don't know.
But it is a concern you have.
Yeah.
He also had to have a hip replacement.
Yeah.
And again, you've wondered whether the hepatitis C affected his bone strength.
Yeah.
What particularly made you concerned about that?
Well, when he had the hip replacement, the surgeon told us that when he went in, he put his hand in and the bone just disintegrated in his hand, literally, just disintegrated. But he made a good recovery, made a really good recovery. But, you know, I think we were a bit shocked at the time as to how bad it was. He was in a lot of pain. He was in a wheelchair. You know, he couldn't walk. So, you know, he needed to have it done. But I don't think we realised at the time the extent of the damage.
And your question has arisen, you don't know, but was there a link to it being particularly bad because of the hepatitis C?
Yeah.
You've said earlier in your evidence that when your husband was having the dialysis and dealing with the renal failure, he'd carried on working.
Yes, he ran his own business.
And life had carried on for the two of you.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the emotional effect of the diagnosis of hepatitis C on your husband?
Well, like I said before, it was just something else to deal with at the time. You know, with any chronic illness, it's not going to get better. So you adjust your life around that, and then when somebody else comes along and say, you've got this as well. I'm sorry. I'm okay.
Changed as a person.
Oh, massive change. Yeah. It was horrible to live with. He was just like a different person. And I think he felt that, you know, life had been so cruel. And he just didn't deserve to have something else as well, you know, with everything else that was going on. Yeah, it changed a lot.
He became more insular.
Very. Yeah, he never told anybody he got hepatitis C. Because at the time, I think people thought they associated it with HIV, and there was a lot of stigma, and, you know, people thought they could catch it by touching you or whatever. I mean, I knew different, but other people didn't know. And so we just lived in our own little world, you know, and we just got on with it.
Not even the rest of the family knew?
No.
Nobody knew?
No. But she's a nursing sister that dealt with, well, we've been friends 55 years. So she's like my sister.
The big sister, not Lincoln Bristol.
And that feeling of isolation and of stigma was made worse because of changes to how your husband had his dialysis.
Yeah.
Can you tell us
Very
about
much
that?
so. Yeah.
What happened?
I dialysed him at home for 21 years. But when he started to deteriorate, we had to attend the hospital renal unit. But when we'd gone abroad, we were on holiday, we obviously had to tell them that he got hepatitis C. So we were isolated from all the other patients, and sometimes in not a very nice area, you'd be pushed into a little corner somewhere with the oldest machine, the oldest chair, no TV, no contact with anybody else, and just made to feel, you know, like you got some contagious disease. It was awful.
And sometimes your home dialysis machine would break.
Yeah.
And you'd then have to go into the hospital in this country.
Yeah.
And much the same thing happened.
Yeah, it was you were in isolation again. And you're on dialysis, well, Lynn was on dialysis 4 hours, 45 minutes, 3 times a week. It's a hell of a long time to sit there on your own, you know, with no come. I mean, I used to sit there with him, but you know, it's not just not. That's not very nice to have to do. And then if you're not feeling well anyway, you know, the way that you're treated, because they need to isolate you, you know, and everybody used to come in all this protective gear, you know, and it was just awful.
And there was one particular occasion when you were going down to the coast and wanted to be, would obviously need to be dialysed down there.
Yeah, well, we're
what
going
happened?
it could only go 2 days without dialysis. So if we were going for any longer than that, he had to dialyse wherever we were. And his mum lived in Paignton at the time, and he hadn't seen her for a while. We were in Sheffield, so it's, you know, it's a long way. By the time we got there, he would have needed to dialyse. So the renal unit in Sheffield contacted Exeter, which was the nearest hospital, and said, could they dialyse him? And they said no, because of his hepatitis C. They hadn't got the facility, they hadn't got a machine that they could use. So she I mean, I wish she hadn't have done it, but the renal nurse that tried to fix it up said that his mother was dying, so that's why he needed the dialysis, and they relented and they said they'd do it, but I didn't know any of this, and when I got there she said, I'm so sorry to hear about your mother-in-law, and I had no idea what she was talking about. And it was only when we got back to Sheffield that she told me what she'd done. She said if I hadn't done that, they wouldn't have dialysed you.
Your husband was on the renal transplant list, but his health continued to deteriorate.
Mm-hmm.
He took early retirement in 2001.
Yeah,
And then in 2006, you were told he had renal cancer.
yeah.
What can you tell us about how he came to be diagnosed with renal cancer?
He was getting short of breath, and they advised us to see a consultant cardiologist. So he had various tests at the appointment, and then we went back, and I thought it was just a routine follow-up appointment. And when we actually got into the consultants, it was a consultant I'd never seen before. It was the first time I'd met him, and he'd never met before. And he was just looking through his notes and said, well, I'm sorry to say, it looks like you've got renal cancer. And we were absolutely flabbergasted. We got no idea. And then, of course, everything gets set into motion about surgery and to remove the kidney. I mean, up to that point, he did have cysts on his kidneys, but they'd been beneficial because, without getting too technical, dialysis patients don't make erythropoietin, which is in your blood, which keeps your haemoglobin high, stops you feeling tired all the time. And his cysts were producing EPO on their own, so he didn't need to have it as an injection. So they were a good thing, but then one's turned rogue or whatever it does, but then they assured us, they said all along, if you're going to get it, it's the best cancer to get because it's isolated in the kidney. It's not going anywhere, you know, so we were a little bit reassured, you know. I mean, it's still a devastating diagnosis, but we just sort of said, well, we'll, you know, you just go along with whatever they're advising you to do.
And he was then referred to the oncology department to look at surgery to remove the kidney.
Yeah, correct.
What were you told?
in
What were you told originally about the removal of the kidney?
that they would just take it out. You know, they would remove the kidney, and then there was no mention of chemotherapy or anything. That was it, really. They just said they would remove it and dialysis would carry on as normal.
There were then some concerns about his lungs
Yeah.
because he got some fluid on
Got
the
some
lungs.
fluid on his lungs, yeah.
And so what happened in relation to that?
He was referred back to the Northern General and to a cardiology lady who they put a tube in his back and drew off all this fluid. It's quite a lot of fluid, apparently. And they said they would test the fluid that they'd taken off and they would ring us. He was in hospital for about 3 days or something. And I can remember getting the phone call at home. This lady rang and said, there's no cancer in the lungs. You know, the fluid was clear. And, you know, it's sort of good news. And we thought we were sort of, oh, yeah, you know, at last, some good news.
And so you went back to discuss the removal of the kidney.
Yeah.
And what happened between the August and the October?
I can't remember. Nothing happened. You know,
You kept
I just
phoning.
kept phoning and saying, have we got a date for the surgery? You know, when is it going to happen? And I kept getting fobbed off with, you know, oh, there's problems with the theatre because of his hep C. They can only do it either at the end of the day or it was the end of the day. That's the only time they could do it, and the theatres were full, and then they were only available on certain days, and they had to coordinate it with his dialysis, and you know, it just seemed like it was just too much trouble.
When your husband finally went back in on the October of 2006, what did they find in relation to the kidney? What were you told?
That the cancer had spread, you know, and that it was inoperable, and that it had spread to his lungs. And we said, well, you know, we've already been told that there was no cancer there, so this must have happened between being told there was no cancer to waiting for the surgery.
And within your husband's medical records, there's quite a lengthy letter explaining what was going on during that time. We haven't got it up on the screen, but the explanation in relation to the delay from mid-August to October was a problem we have with organisation of lists across the two hospitals and the need to access the dialysis unit. There's quite a considerable administrative problem organising and getting access to the theatre lists. There's no reference to hepatitis C being an issue, but you recall in your conversations that was a significant
Absolutely.
element of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Your husband had been given some treatment to try and slow the cancer down, but as you say, by the October it had spread into the renal vein and into the lymph nodes, and it was also into the lungs.
Yeah.
Your husband remained on medication to try and slow the course of the cancer, even though it was inoperable, but he died on the 2008.
My birthday.
You've said in your statement you had to stay strong while your husband was alive and you were caring for him, but that after he died you didn't want to see anyone, and you stayed off work for 3 months and couldn't face the world.
Is that this one?
We talked earlier that you didn't particularly want to say any more than that, but then there were difficulties as well with the undertakers, and you did ask me to read a couple of paragraphs from your statement about the difficulties you had in relation to the funeral arrangements. So I'll do that now. Okay. My husband's hepatitis C infection affected his funeral arrangements. I have a good friend of more than 50 years who's a clinical nurse specialist and who worked at the hospital, and in the course of her job dealt with death all the time. When my husband was dying, she held his hand and tried to make his final moments less traumatic. She also advised me not to go to the funeral home because the undertakers would refuse to prepare his body due to his hepatitis C infection. My husband always dressed very smartly, and he had several beautiful suits. I picked out a lovely suit for him to wear, but the funeral home wouldn't allow them to dress him, and he was cremated in his hospital gown with his suit laid on top of him. And that's something you found particularly upsetting.
Yeah.
Thanks. Final part I wanted to ask you about. You and your husband received one payment from the Skipton Fund at some time between 2003 and 2007. But since then, you've heard nothing further from the Skipton Fund and nothing from the new scheme, the EIBSS.
No.
And in fact, you're not even particularly aware of who the
I didn't
EIBSS
know
is.
it existed.
Until I asked you whether you'd heard from it. Okay. Mrs. AX, that's all I have to ask you. Is there anything else you would like to say?
No.
So,
Okay.
It's really important that you've come to give this very moving evidence. And one of the features of giving evidence orally is it is not just what is said, but how you say it. And sometimes what isn't said, but how you say it nonetheless, tells you everything you need to know, which words couldn't convey. That's, in my view, that's what you've shown us today, so thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll carry that. Is that yours?
We'll take a break. We'll take a break until 1:20.
thank you, sir.
1:20.